All right, Alex, we were talking about metrics and I did a little rant. I did a little coffee topic and I kind of ranted about metrics and I will admit I probably didn't articulate it very well. But it was a rant. What do you expect? And my whole thing was I've heard managers say this my entire career, that quote about, what gets counted gets controlled, or what gets measured gets managed. There's always some variation of it. And they use it to justify measuring every possible thing under the sun so that we can control it. Well, I got a couple of questions about that, but I started looking up, like, who the heck said that? Everyone says it was Stephen Covey, the day planner guru. Franklin Covey was the partnership, I think, but it wasn't. It was V.F. Ridgway back in, I think, the 50s, said I think it was what gets measured gets managed, even if we shouldn't be measuring it. It was a cautionary tale, meaning be careful what you decide to measure, because then that will become the work, that you will then be focused on that thing, and it could be the wrong thing. And then I was reminded of the lean guru. His name is escaping me now. He said, measure what matters, but know what matters first. And that sort of aligns with that. It was like, if you start counting something, you'll be aware of it, and then people will go, oh, they're tracking this, okay, so I'm going to do this. But it should matter. It should be important. So I kind of come into this with that kind of foundation, but I want you to give me that reality check. Tell me I'm off base. But I thought we could get into metrics, the good, the bad, the good, bad, the ugly, the pros and cons, leading, lagging. Like, where do we start? Let's start somewhere logical. What do you suggest?
So, starting somewhere logical, I might start with um, what are even the value of metrics to people? To
Okay.
to me, a lot of people think uh, the purpose of metrics is to tell us reality and predict the future. So a lot of people look at metrics and they think it's going to predict the future for them. I think 90% of business is trend line goes this way bad, trend line goes that way good, or whatever, depending on the
Right.
measure, right? Um, so they think just because there's a straight trend line today, that will continue tomorrow. So I think there's two sides to this that we want to measure. Why do we measure things? And what is most important to actually give us predictors for the future and for what we care about? So I think it is important to measure and understand the facts of what happened, being able to look at the state of things. There's a lot of, if we don't know if we were ahead or behind today, do we really know if we were successful? If we don't know, you know, whether this is sales or safety or operations, if we don't know the score at the end of the game, how do we know if we're doing well or not? So I think there definitely is something as about forming a baseline that you have to do and have an understanding of the baseline. But I think that often gets inflated with understanding what control you have over that. So understanding what to measure and what control you have over the results of that measure is a key thing. So I think that's maybe a good place to start, is to say, what are we trying to measure, and what is it that we control that affects that measure?
Yeah, I mean, because you could effectively, especially with technology today, or even just with a spreadsheet, you can measure all sorts of things. So I think that's a great question. I wrote down, uh, what is the value of what we're measuring? What is it giving us? And that's why I see value. What am I getting out of this? Um, in business, or let's say safety, I want to be able to determine, one, are we focusing on the right things? Are we doing the right things? So you said two other things: facts of what happened. So if something didn't go right according to our plan, right? Maybe it's our safety plan, maybe it's we set up SOPs, maybe we organized the workspace in a way that we thought was productive and safe, efficient and safe. Something bad happened. What did we miss? Like, if it was a good plan, why didn't it work? And so the facts of what happened, and then the state of things. That's a good one. And we've talked in the past about audits and inspect. Well, we inspect things, we audit processes, right? That always start with that framework. But the state of things, if we set something up, are we maintaining it? Is it controlling what we thought? How is it working? And so audits and inspections kind of come into mind with that, um, giving us an idea of the state of things. And then you mentioned predicting the future. I thought leading indicator, predictive measures. Like a lot of folks are like, lagging indicators suck. We need to be looking at leading indicators. And I'm like, well, maybe, but that doesn't mean the other ones suck. So let's talk about maybe those two categories, because I know you have some thoughts on leading and lagging and what those might mean.
So if I'm allowed to rant, I'm going to rant for a second.
Do it.
But I see a big debate right now on whether we even, if TRIR is even a good measure. And there's a lot of people debating on if it predicts anything, if it's valuable. And they're the counter to it, the people that are mostly, I think, the main ones against it, are proposing a new measure. And I don't believe I have seen good evidence to say that that new measure is any less subjective, is not going to be gamified any more or less than than the current system.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's any more predictive. And so when I look at just debates about measures, what we should be measuring, I think that people miss the point. Most of the time, management is trying to assess where we're at in order to make strategies for the future. A good data set allows you to make better and more informed decisions, but also people tie things like bonuses, they tie things like, uh, uh, pay increases and promotions to different measures. And so most of what we're trying to do is we're trying to cover for these measures. And instead of taking them as, okay, I want to collect as good quality of information as I can, erring on the side of problems. So what I mean by that is I don't cheat when it comes to TRIR. I'm not going to game this. If someone got hurt, that's a bad thing. We
Yes.
want to have that. We're not going to play the game of is this truly a recordable or not. So let's measure it as the worst case. That's a good ethical thing to do as a leader, and it's probably the right mindset. It's also not going to get you promoted, and it'll hurt your career.
Man, I'll do one worse for you. I'll pile on to your rant. This is not a counter rant. This is a hell yeah, piling on here. I want to know. See, to me, I was trained and taught this way, if you will, that when somebody gets injured, that's what we want to know. That's the metric. When did this happen? One, because that also gives us context that we need when something or some things are taking place. All businesses do some variation of this, and it's frustrating. They will go with the day, or they want to know when it was made recordable for the OSHA log. Well, how we gamify, or I say gamify, how we manipulate this is according to the 1904 standards, the OSHA record keeping standard, the business has 7 days from the day they are aware or made aware that it meets one of the recordability criteria, 7 days to just write it on the log, either a physical paper log, or put it in, flip it in your system, your digital management system, we have a recordable injury illness on the log of injuries and illnesses, right? 7 days. So what businesses do is they set some, and nobody has ever given me an answer to this, some arbitrary number of recordables that we feel comfortable with every week. If we have, so we'll say we don't want to see any more than 3 recordables a week in a given week. If there's more than 3, we have a problem. So what the sites do, what the managers do, is they go, oh man, we've got 5 recordables this week. Well, the last 2 happened on Wednesday and Friday. So what we'll do is we'll just push those into the next week. So we only record, like, yeah, but they still happened in that week. What was going on in that week? You had a bunch of people, you had attrition, you just came out of layoffs, and this is the trailing week after layoff. Those are all important information. So if I'm tracking the days they're made, the week they're made recordable, I'm losing some of that context. I don't give a crap. I don't care about that metric. I want to know when we're injuring people. I want to know when, because I need to know what was going on at that time. And if you punt, it's just a first aid, right? We just took a first aid, a minor injury, right? And the site knows full well that they're at the doctor, there's paperwork coming back, and I know exactly what's going to happen. Or I have paperwork and I'm sitting on it because I don't have to put it on the log until next week, until, day 6, right? The business says, oh, we just had a handful of first aids. All right, those are minor. Those are okay. Then we've reduced that risk profile in our processes to where it's just minor things. Anyway, that's just my piling on my rant of like that. Why do I care the week we made it recordable? I want to know when we're injuring people.
Well, and that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to do things like statistical process control on safety metrics. So if you're trying to plot a upper and lower control limit and Six Sigma this, you're going to struggle with safety measures, partly because they get so gamified. I had one of the ways I got promoted once was because the guy that had that job, they had a pack out rate that they had to do every week, a dollar amount, and they were fudging it, basically meaning they would record and scan something as if it was packed, and they would catch it up the next week in the early part of the week. And so basically every week there was this, pile of stuff that had to be packed out that was already said shipped. And they ran into a problem because they eventually got caught because something big got in that pile and got detected. But, gamifying measures misses it. It's important for people. It's in a career. There's people get promotions based on measures, but it blinds you to understanding problems. And if you're hiding from problems, you're never going to solve them. And just pushing that pile into next week doesn't solve the issue of why we couldn't do it this week and why things got missed. And it just makes it's just covering up. So I think the first thing we want to say with any measures is we want them to be accurate and we don't want to be covering up problems. The next thing kind of ties into what you're saying, what you were asking originally, which is leading versus lagging. What's important? I think the reason why lagging indicators get a bad rep is because people treat them like they're predictive, and safety measures are really bad at that. Right? Your injury rate is not necessarily predictive of even what you're doing today.
Yeah.
you guys could actually have been made huge improvements in your safety culture and in the activities that are going on, and blocking off hazards, and really being really proactive, but somebody's still getting injured, because you probably haven't got it everywhere. You probably haven't covered every scenario. So again, there sometimes people overreact. So I like to go think on this. One of my biggest examples that I tie back to was, um, basically they were peer audits. I won't call them behavior-based safety audits, but they were peer audits. We basically had a requirement. You had to have one a week.
Right.
Everybody in the plant had to do one a week. And do you think those were done on Monday, Wednesday, or Friday?
Work will expand to fit the time allotted. I say it was the last day of the week they filled it out.
It always went that way. It was like, if you had to do this many in a month, 5 were done at the last week. It was that kind of thing. So I see a lot of people trying to push toward measures that are based on observations. And I think those are becoming more interesting as things like AI for analysis, for analyzing what comments people are putting in. I think they are getting more interesting, but I also know that garbage in equals garbage out.
Yeah.
And if your measures, if your incentives are driving people to completion, your quality is going to be bad. The purpose is going to be missed, and you're probably not going to get much, I would say, real data, useful data out of it. That's why at the plant we changed from a certain number every month to, we stopped tracking that. We still tracked it, but we stopped like that being the measure. The measure started to be getting to number of significant findings.
Yes.
And
That's more of a qualitative metric versus a quantitative, which is, did you
yeah,
do the 5? Yes. Okay, well, they all
and
sucked, but
it
that
was a
doesn't
lot more
matter.
work
I
though.
still get the grade. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a lot more work, and that's the person that has to record this now has a job of reading every single one of these, marking it some systematic way of if it's good find or bad find, and that had benefits. We tweaked it a little bit more to be more about corrective action too, and those kind of
Yeah.
things make a difference. It changes again the purpose of it, but I think when we're doing leading versus lagging, I don't know that we always set the right, we'll say, parameter for what actually is leading. So like, I'll give an example. A popular new book right now, Hallowell has actually got it on my desk right here. I finished it. I was going through it again. But it's his energy safety book, and I'm not pimping his book, but it's a popular one. I'm sure you've seen it on LinkedIn and other places. They have a measure that they're trying to create for measuring the number of critical controls in place. And it's so subjective because in order to mark if something was a critical control or not, you have like 6 criteria it had to meet. And all I can think of is, how am I going to realistically do this in a way that is actually predictive of a job that day? And I don't think some of these measures that are being recommended are ones that are actually providing a leading indicator that day. So I kind of go back to what I would call deer sign as a supervisor. If you're going hunting, you got to know if the deer is in the area. You're looking for signs. You're looking for poop and tracks and beds and
Right.
all these different things. And I think a lot of things that are what are better leading indicators are probably things that supervisors have to look for the day of, and it's signs of things. Maybe it's things like precursors.
Yeah, I think I've heard them called weak signals,
Yeah,
precursor. It doesn't even have to be an event. It could just be conditions that are present that we haven't interacted with yet, that we were like, okay, we've got to clear this up before we go in here.
but
Yeah.
tracking that, and I've seen people try to track that. They're like, how many precursors have we found today? And you're like, is this the right? We should, if we find them, we should solve them. Waiting on tracking them doesn't seem like it's the right
Yeah,
But
I get it. I think it's an attempt. It's also an attempt, and I think you touched on it at the beginning where we conflate these things. It's also an attempt, which is valid, I think, an attempt to measure our efforts, how good we are at, finding and fixing things. So, but what happens is with everything else in business, and I think it's just human nature that we shift our focus from doing that job. The job should be, one, do we maintain presence on the floor? Two, do we have a process to evaluate? Certainly, we can get into SIFs, but certainly high risk operations, of assessing those conditions prior to the work beginning, to make sure, like, that's the work. Are we doing the work? We aren't just observers. We're not spectators in some sport that's taking place that we have no effect or impact on. We're in the game. Like, we're not just watching and keeping score, and we are actually in. We have the ability to impact the score, the final score, the game, and I think it's an attempt of, some of these efforts are a good faith attempt at measuring our, how good we are at the work, at doing the work, and then but then it becomes distraction of, oh, I noticed these things, and then we start then pulling away from the work and managing the numbers, if that makes sense. Am I
yeah,
even way off base on this?
if we have too many metrics, that's what you're going to focus on. That's what your people are focused on. And do you
Yeah.
really want them focused on number go up? Maybe you do, because there is some operational numbers that you have to get a certain degree, but you can only focus on so many things.
I want to remind everybody to go out and support our partners in safety. They help make this podcast happen. Of course, I'm talking about Mighty Line Floor Tape, the original partners in safety on the Safety Pro podcast. Now, look, if you're struggling in your facilities with layout, floor marking, maybe you're having safety issues related to organization, concerns, Mighty Line's got you covered. You're going to be able to 5S your entire facility without painting a single part of your floor. They've got line tape, they've got directional signs, they've got icons that you can get to stick on your floor, instructions, you can get custom logos and design signs, labels, you name it, they've got you covered. They've got floor tape that is slip resistant. They've got floor tape that is built to withstand forklift traffic. Don't take my word for it. Go get a sample for yourself. Go to mightylinetape.com/podcast. Fill out the form. They'll send you a free sample. It also lets them know that we sent you. Again, mightylinetape.com/podcast. Also, big shout out to Aero Safety. I've gotten to know Drew over the years at Aero Safety. I've had Drew on the podcast a number of times where he's broken down some safety issues that all safety managers face, and we have great discussions. Hope to have him back on again soon. The reason why I talked to Drew is Aero Safety, as far as safety services providers go, they are the official safety service provider of the Safety Pro podcast. I'm going to tell everybody that asks, hey, do you have anybody that can do custom training for us? Do you have anyone that can help us with our safety program development, audits, inspections? Drew has you covered. I always send people to Aero Safety. Go to aerosafetyus.com. You're going to get something that's built, designed for you in your business, not some generic off-the-shelf service. All right. That's aerosafetyus.com. Get a custom quote today.
Yeah.
Right. Um,
Yeah. I mean,
I remember,
I think I go back to this old, man, what was that? It was called, First Break All the Rules, that old Gallup book. Um, I would recommend anybody go back to that book and read it. It's crazy. And I think they broke down, that's where the 12 core questions, the Q12 or whatever, 12 core questions came from that was very popular for a while. The first one for any worker, you could be a PhD with 40 years experience and you get hired in at a new company, you still have the same first question. The first three, they did like base camp, like climbing a mountain, right? And there's sets of 3 questions, and there's 12. You can't focus on the 10th, 11th, and 12th question until you get these first sets of questions answered satisfactorily. And the first one is, do I know what's expected of me every day? That's it. So you say you mentioned a worker, like, yeah, production. We're here for a reason. This company makes widgets. I've got to produce so many widgets a day. I'm going to do that. I think where we can get a lot better as a safety industry, safety profession, is integrating successfully safety into that process. Meaning, you have to do this many, but we're going to train you on the how you do it. And safety is just a natural part of it. You cannot pick any pieces out of the how and to make this faster. I don't care if it's quality, safety, or whatever, or cost. Like, it all has to be there, and you'll get your rate at the end of the day. And if you can't, we'll have to figure that out.
It has to make sense with that, because again, I've seen, people been given certain run rates they have to follow, and they're like, well, look, if I have to take the time to put on this fall protection or change off, this does affect my run rate that day. So I do try to take shortcuts. We use an example. It was an old Toyota example of there was a person that was falling behind on. They're basically installing seatbelts, and they have to install seatbelts all day. And this person was, I think it was they were like 6'7" or 6'6", or a big tall person. And they were having to reach down and get that seatbelt and pull it up off the part rack, and then climb in the vehicle to install it. Well, hitting that measure, they've got a certain amount of time to hit in the next car. And they would fall behind a few, because a big, tall guy got to go all the way.
Yeah.
My back's hurting just thinking about it. And, over the course of a full shift, they would lose a couple seconds over that shift. And so they had to start, changing what they do and changing the path and rushing and going faster. And if your measures are so tight that it doesn't allow for people to do it in a way that matches their body or some of those kind of like the safe way to do it, you can start to see them have to take shortcuts and start to see them have to break rules in order to keep pace. And that's when people end up getting injured or cause quality defects, whatever bad outcomes you want to prescribe to them. But that's where we start to see that kind of stuff, is when we set up a system where people are going to fail and going to struggle.
So now we're getting into like metrics being a natural outcome of a design fallacy, that we assume we designed something properly. Why are we still having these issues? And then we try to manage the numbers on the back end when it's, I'm not saying we accept it, but we miss this reality that you just talked about. Ergonomics is a great example. Every workstation is the same height. And we're like, well, we followed the industry standard for height. Well, that's based on the average. There's an average male worker, average female worker, height in weights. And well, you show me that average worker. If you have 1,000 workers, you might have 2. I don't know I can't remember. Somebody's going to roast me, I'm sure, in the comments.
You'll be average in one feature. There's no average person. And in fact,
that's my point. Yeah. Age, tenure, height, gender, like you can build something for the average, and then none of your workers will meet that average. So then you're still going to have these on these edges or margins, these issues that pop, and you're like, well, I don't understand why. We've designed everything. Well, like, yeah, but everybody is different. So that's a great example of how we kind of miss We miss
Yeah.
that piece.
And if you take all of the features of a person and made them all average, you actually get a really goofy looking person. Because
That's a good point.
we have never seen an average person. You've never seen one. They don't exist. So it's a little bit of the weird things. I had two people that worked for me. One of them was 6'8", and the other was 4'11", and they worked on the same piece of equipment. Like, again, just the different height difference of people, and they have to work and deal with those constraints and moving things, and all sorts of different challenges arise. I just did a video on our YouTube channel about mistakes by design, and talking about designing for universal design.
Yeah.
So when we think about things like, a workspace design, you have to think about equitable use. And that doesn't mean that you do the average so that it works for no one.
Yes.
It's how do you make it flexible so that anyone can do the job and meet rate.
Yeah.
And that's a very tricky thing to do.
When I used to, I'm going to say teach, but I don't really like that word, coach. I don't know. I would deliver a training topic to new safety, coordinators they didn't have any formal training in safety management or anything. They're starting out, right? And we would cover inspections and audits and why there's a difference, and there's a difference in how you approach them and all that good stuff. They asked me about, hey, what do you do when workers are in this particular shop? They the maintenance team and the machine operators, they had to do certain amount of routine maintenance. They would modify their tools and stuff. And they would say, hey, our policy is you can't use shop made tools, or you can't modify your tools. What do we do when we see those? We write them down and we turn them in, but like, people still do it. And I said, that's because if they prevent them from doing that, they won't be able to do the job. What I taught them, what I shared with them is, to me, when you're modifying your workspace or your tools, it's because it's not fitting your need in some way, right? Something as simple as a chair. They had a shop chair, and they had taken a foam off of an old chair that was damaged. They took the seat foam and cut strips of it and put it on the arm and taped it. And so they were like, look at this. Like, we need to get them new chairs. I go, no, that chair is fine. They don't have enough padding. What they're saying is they do a lot of this resting their arms, and it was hard, so they put padding. They're telling you what they need, right? Or if somebody has a stool and they're like, hey, you're not supposed to have a stool over here. What do you go? Well, maybe they're shorter and they can't reach that top shelf where other workers can. So they've adapted. Those are all signs. Like, they're telling us something, and that doesn't mean we accept it. That might mean that we have to build that flexibility, which I love that word, that flexibility into the workspace or into what we offer them for job aids. Those inspections are a great opportunity for us to kind of get ideas from workers too, as well.
So my big rant on this whole thing, to tie it all back to where we started with metrics. I think we could have less metrics and more gimbal walks, and we'd probably be better off. And looking at ways of how do we make problems visible while walking on the shop floor or working in an industry, we'd be better off focusing on creating more of those and less metrics to measure. The other thing is, if we really think about our measures, is there a way to be proactive and discover these problems before they exist in a proactive way? And that's the kind of thing we shouldn't be measuring, but we should be auditing to find. Yeah. And do less. I don't want to do proactive data recording. That's not going to be, again, leading indicator, recording too many leading indicators is probably, I'm not going to say it's a waste of time because I haven't seen the data enough to know, but my gut tells me it's just paperwork. It's more paperwork, and it's not really telling you what you think it is, because it's just going to game. A better thing is to say, okay, we've got our reactive measures. Those keep our score. And we have these proactive actions that we're going to be committed to taking and looking for these signs, and measure them or not. I don't know that it is necessary, but I think you really should have a really clear understanding of what people need to be looking for from a proactive standpoint, and go out and do that. Track it or not, I don't know if it's worth it, but I think more value spent there than tracking another metric for someone to check off and send out every week. Probably is the best.
It's going to be more difficult to do. It's more work, as you indicated earlier, but it's more effective, right? And I think people want efficient over effective, or they think they're the same word and they're not. Sometimes the most efficient thing isn't the most effective thing, and sometimes the most effective thing may take a little more time or effort, which by some definitions would be less efficient, but it's on the back end, you're going to improve things a lot more. And I think the approach is, you're right, that we get more local with what we're measuring at the site level. For example, if we had 12 improvement projects that changed layout or process design, or acquired some additional tools or whatever, all those efforts we just kind of went down, we talked about, your audit would be, are those working? How are those looking 3 months, 6 months, 12 months later? Are they solving for what we thought? How effective were we at solving that problem? Did those ideas work? And that becomes your metric. Maybe it's recidivism rate, right? Not injuries, but how many of those projects did we have to go back and redo because we missed something or it didn't work? But then again, I'm thinking, yeah, but it's trial and error. That's the thing with ideas, is you could have an idea and then find out that you learn something new, and that's not going to work because of XYZ, so we're going to pivot and do the. I don't even know how useful that is. I think. Go ahead.
I was going to say that we do this in two ways, because you have two different sides to this. You've got verification and validation. So verification would be, I verify that it was completed. Whatever that project is, whatever.
That's a pass fail, right?
Yeah, I had to get it done. So yeah. you have to have a measure to when you verify that it was done. Validation is a validation of effectiveness. And yes, that is one of the hardest things for people to recognize. There is a famous lean graph. It comes from the Shingo Prize Institute.
Yeah.
And it applies to everything, but it's basically, it's this little, it has this stagnant line, and it kind of comes up and then it levels off, and it has these areas. And sometimes it talks about, where do we regress back to? And it came from basically they have people that go for this prize, and they look at the data and they say, okay, some percent of people never get off the ground. They never make an improvement. Some percent of people see improvement, but they don't stick with it. But there's this group of people that, and it's only 15% actually see sustained improvement in something. And the majority of, in their case, it was lean implementation, but it was lean implementations fail after 5 years. They regress back to the mean after 5 years. Only 15% keep that improvement, and only 5% of that 15 actually see continuous growth. And their point was that most things regress back to the mean, and being 5 years. Now, I think 5 years is an interesting number, because if you think about how many times you've changed jobs in 5 years, and how many new leaders come in, and how many new people that started projects left, like 5 years actually has a lot of lost knowledge every 5 years. And so one of the things that I think people struggle with is, how do they figure out validation for the next business leader, the next person coming in? We rarely do a good job of handoffs between leadership of, hey, these were the problems we were dealing with 5 years ago. Here's the actions we took to solve them. Don't break these. We
Yeah.
don't do a very good job of that. And so people have to figure out ways to create a process that validates corrective actions and doesn't overburden the system. Because again, I'm going to audit this new corrective action. Well, I did 10 corrective actions every month. I've got 10 more audits I have to do every month. It's exponential.
Yeah, and I think a good way to do that is you break it down by process. Like maybe if you did 10 corrective actions, maybe 6 of them were related to one process, right?
Yeah.
So you have a process audit. It's not that you're auditing 10, you don't have 10 audits. You're still auditing that process. It's just that your area of focus should be on those risks, right? That's the whole point. Are we reducing risk as low as reasonably practicable, right? And to various standards that we have set in place, but we have a standard that we have, okay, this is acceptable risk, you know? And have we mitigated that or are we managing that? That's pretty, I don't want to say it's easy, but that's a simplified way of looking at it versus, and then getting away from this fear of holy crap, like scope creep, like you just said. I've had how many improvement efforts? Well, one, if you had that many corrective actions to improve a process, I would say that's good feedback to go back to whatever team or however we set up jobs or design the work. Are we learning as we go how to design safer processes? Because you should, as we learn, and we do the rework, all the corrective actions, that feedback loop has to go back to that team, whether you have an engineering team or a industrial design team, that say, hey, this is what we learned. You designed this process, launched it, 12 months later, we had these incidents and issues. We've corrected for them. This should be the standard for similar designs, like if we're going to launch a new site or do like that that iteration should be taking place. You should see that trend line go down instead of up with incidents, right? Does that make sense? I mean,
Yeah.
we're talking about it and it's perfect, but that's what's missing sometimes.
Yeah, and it's well, we typically talk about generic cause related to this, which is, I might find a specific problem with a specific incident or this specific piece of equipment. Well, I've got similar types around, I have similar processes, and it's oftentimes worth going and saying, hey, let's look at a broader scope on this. I've got a labeling problem here. Do I have a labeling problem everywhere? How big of a problem really is this? Yeah, it caused it here, but I probably got 20 other pieces of equipment that are similar. Let's go look at those as well. And so it's definitely an in scope for investigations, but likewise with metrics, we want to think about, okay, I'm doing this inspection now. Maybe I'm recording that information. What am I going to do with it? Is this actually valuable? And is it worth inspecting it everywhere or just here? Is this something I need to be doing for the next 6 months or the next year or forever? All those kind of things have to come into play when it comes to thinking about how do I make sure that this corrective action lasts. One of the scariest things that you can do is go look at corrective actions you put in place 5 years ago. That's one, I almost don't recommend doing it. You don't want to know. But I remember this, we had a tool, we purchased a special brass pry bar. It was basically a giant brass screwdriver, and they used it for installation of giant rollers, big old rollers, and they didn't want it to scrape the metal, so they had to have a special.
They need soft metal, yeah.
Yeah, so you couldn't use rubber because the rubber those coatings just wore off. And so we had to purchase a special metal one. And I remember, this was pretty early when I was in that plant. It was about 5 years later. And I was like, where is that? Hey, I was just doing an audit. And I was like, hey, where's that special part that we had? And he goes, I don't know where it is. I think it's over in there. We had to go hunt for an hour to find it.
That 5-year regression is real, man.
It's legit. And even in a place that, the same people were doing that job. It wasn't like, a new person had come in and forgotten
Oh,
about it.
wow. These are the
You
same
know,
people.
it was like the same person, and so it's that kind of thing of like, even, it just got misplaced one day and they had to keep doing their work, and that kind of stuff can occur.
Yeah.
And so that's just one of those things. And creating that culture, ideally in the culture, you would have wanted them to say, hey, I can't find this. And have brought it up and somebody had found it. But again, it was somebody was just trying to do their job that day, and I'll find it later, and find it later never came.
Yeah. Never underestimate the will of somebody wanting to do their job. You know what I
Yep.
mean? They'll figure out a way to do it. And look, you're probably your best. I've said this a lot of times, especially when somebody gets injured and they cut a corner, quote unquote, cut a corner, or they had to adapt right to get the job done. Those are usually your better workers. Those are usually your workers that are either have no trouble producing, or usually have a tendency to want to overproduce. One of the 8 wastes, oddly enough, but they
The
think
worst way.
if
That's the
I do
worst way.
more, I'm good, I'm better, right? I can do more. But those are usually your better workers, and so that kind of fits with, I don't know if you call it risk taking, but like you said, I need this tool, I misplaced it, I got to get this done. I don't want to stop and talk to 5 people. I'll just use this. And then now that becomes the new normal for them.
Yeah.
So
So
crazy.
I think we proved it. All metrics are lies, and we don't need leading indicators. I think we proved it.
Now, that's what somebody's going to clip that and they're just going to go with it.
Hey,
Look, even in our discussion, we wanted to talk about metrics and we kept going back to the work. We kept getting pulled back because
I
that's
mean, to me,
where we
that's the
focus.
most important thing, is getting leadership onto the floor, getting people onto the floor, because that's, I can look at graphs all day, but actually getting your hands involved makes a bigger difference than anything else.
So, here, as we try to wrap this up, what would you recommend? Maybe you've been in this situation, especially in your capacity at TapRoot, uh, consulting with customers. If a business manager or leader says, whatever, that's, I don't know, I can't get into the weeds, I'm an approving authority and I have to maintain this 30,000-foot view. Totally get it. I totally understand. Therefore, I want to know how many recordables we've taken, but I want to know, like what we talked about earlier, I want to know when they became recordable. Um, if I want, I can figure out the date that it happened, but I want to know how many recordable injuries were taken week over week. I need to see that metric because I have too many sites to look at. I've got to make, business decisions for, to allocate resources. Like, and we're like, okay, well, that's easily manipulated and it doesn't really get us what we should be focused on when we're injuring, not when we write it on some log the government wants us to fill out.
Now, so I would almost always challenge a metric just to say, are you using this metric? In what ways are you using this metric? So that's first. What ways are you using this metric? That's a good way to determine if it's valuable or not. What I would say in that case of, I can't get out to 35 facilities every whatever period, then as a manager, your responsibility is to make sure that there is someone in that management system process that is doing the inspections at each of those sites for whatever that metric is, for whatever the performance side of that metric is. Those would be probably the 2 things of advice. Whether it's, what decisions do you make based on this? If it's just, well, I want to know it, okay, that's probably, if that's not driving your decision making, it's probably not valuable that they're wasting their time making these graphs for you. The other thing would be, well, I'm holding them accountable with it.
Well, That's what it
that's
is.
often how the measure is for, is to hold people accountable.
Therefore,
That
it gets massaged.
Yeah, therefore, but there's value in holding people accountable to it. So I remember we had an hourly target we had to hit. And each day at the end of the shift, they reported out if they hit it or not. And when they didn't, what happened. And so that process can be extremely valuable, but it also can be a dog and pony show. And
Yes.
it's up to the leader. It's up to the leader to make it valuable. So if you're going to do those accountability things, how do you actually make an impact, and how does it drive their behavior and decisions? And you've got to analyze that. And that's your responsibility as a leader, is to analyze the impacts of the metrics that you're tracking. And I say that the intentional and unintentional. So the intentional is metric go up, but the unintentional is, what are the incentive behaviors? I think we had the podcast on soon certain positives at some point. But that you got to look at those soon certain positives. How is it influencing behavior? And the ideal world is it influences behavior in a positive way. And that's what we want with metrics, is they influence behavior in a positive way. So at the end of the day,
I think that's a good metric to look at, is dog and pony shows. I mean, most folks, the motivation behind that is some form of fear. One, I don't want to look bad. I don't want to get in trouble. I've got to put on a positive show of this or explanation of this. And then as soon as we're off the call, it's, hey, everybody, we got to get this figured out. We got to get this done. And I think that's I know that is one of Deming's 14 leadership principles. Drive out fear, I think, is what it is. Yeah, drive out fear. To make it like, yeah, you have to hold people accountable at some point. I mean, who those workers are, or those leaders are, or managers are. But in general, I worked for a company that did this very well. I was so impressed at how they did this, the culture they developed. It was a lean culture, but I cannot recall a time where any plant manager had to present a quote unquote failure that occurred, and they tried to paint over it or gloss over it, or they owned it. They fell on the sword. They never passed the buck to a lower level area manager or anything.
You need some good plant managers. I can't say I've seen some massage data before.
Oh no, I have. Yeah, in other companies.
I've seen
this
some
this one manufacturing company, they consistently had ingrained in them this, like, this is why we report out. This is what's at risk if we don't report out properly. We can't have that. They made aircraft engine components and parts, so they kind of knew. They owned it. I've told this story a bunch of times about we would have a welder welding on a part. The area manager would say, "Hey, I've got to report our numbers out. Like, we've got these two parts are taking longer than, they of course they have a average time it takes to fabricate or put together a component, right?" And the welder would be at the area meeting, and then they would have then the area manager would go to the plant meeting, and then that's how it cascaded up. The welder would say, "There's no way, I'm not happy with that weld. I really had trouble getting under there for that weld. I don't want it," because they knew quality control would catch it and they would reject it, and that would look poorly on them. Or, and this is what the welder said. I was in the meeting when he said this. He goes, he wasn't concerned about that. He said, if quality control misses it, it's on a plane. And that area manager said, "All right, I can speak to that." And that was all he said. And so then I go to the plant meeting, and he sure as heck said that we're not going to, if we're not 100% certain we're not going to push a part through. So we've got 2 parts that are going to be late, but they're top priority. We're working on those first. And he owned it. He didn't throw the welder under the bus. He said and so they were very consistent about that. But to your point, the years and years it takes to develop that culture and to maintain it was impressive.
Well, and I've aerospace is definitely good with that because there's liability in it too.
Because of the risk, yeah.
Kind
of baked into the cake.
And that ties to you, and it's on a plane, and somebody dies. They know it was your clock number,
right?
So there's a huge level of accountability in that.
Yeah.
So,
Toyota. We did mention this. We talked about book managers. You mentioned you've known a few. They'll read a book and go, "We got to do this." You can read the Toyota way. But Toyota has been at it and the cultural differences and the culture development and the lessons they learned, you can't just distill that into a book and give it to somebody and then they're doing it. It's crazy to think that you're going to pull that off.
There's a whole trough that you go through for implementation of anything new, metrics or processes for reporting them out. I like the 4 quadrant. There's a valley of depression anytime you do them. So there's the resistance at the beginning that everybody's sad about it, and finally there's they get the kind of reluctant compliance, and then they make it there finally.
And then you get those laggards at the end. Yeah, it's the adoption curve, right?
Well, there's the adoption, but it's the inverse of adoption.
There's a rut at the beginning.
Well, it's I think it's whenever you do and I can't remember the exact what they call it. It was 4 quadrant, which was at first, you're introducing something new. Everybody gets pissed off that it's new.
Yes,
and everybody's mad about it. And then they're complaining and kind of it sucks. So they're in the valley of depression, and then they start to see value and they start to understand and get used to it. And finally, you get to whatever that next level is because now they understand it and it's changed. They've gotten used to it. The culture is adapted.
And I don't know, Alex, that our culture today of instant gratification and we've been almost an hour on this podcast and people are like, nope, that's too long. So they'll probably watch all the shorts that we clip out of this and they'll eventually get the whole episode by streaming all the shorts. So if we break up a 1-hour episode into 40-second clips, they'll get the whole thing eventually. But
you got a whole 3 minutes on YouTube.
This is true. All right, man. Metrics aren't, man. I'm still.
How did we talk an hour about metrics?
We could go even longer, I know, but metrics. I loved your question. What ways are we using these? Like, what's this doing for me? At all.
What's it doing?
And I love that. I love that one. Yeah. All right, man. Hey, tell everyone where they can find you and everything about TapRoot. We gotta get that in there. I love the work you guys do.
TapRoot.com. You can find it there. Or if you're finding this on Blaine's YouTube, come check out our YouTube channel as well.
Yes,
we've got lots of fun little episodes over there too. So
pleasure is absolutely. Maybe we do a collaboration. I'll have to come down to Knoxville though.
Knoxville, yeah.
Knoxville, and hang out in your studio. All right, sounds good. Thanks once again, Alex, for taking time out of your busy schedule.